The file was sitting on a desk in a lawyer's office in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it had my name on the tab. Not my sister's name. Mine. I almost didn't open it. That sounds strange now, knowing what was inside. But you have to understand something about the way I was raised. In my family, you did not ask questions that made people uncomfortable. You did not dig. You did not look too closely at things that weren't offered to you freely, because looking too closely was considered a kind of aggression, and aggression was not something the quiet daughter did. I was always the quiet daughter. But the lawyer slid the file across the desk and said, "You need to see this, Mara." And something in his voice made the quiet daughter put her hands on the cover and open it anyway. What I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about my family, my inheritance, and the 29 years I'd spent believing my parents were people who loved me equally. They were not. Wait. Before I tell you what was in that file, before I show you the numbers and the transactions and the dates that will make your stomach drop the same way mine did, I need to take you back. Because the file only made sense because of everything that came before it. And everything that came before it started the way these things always start. Slowly. Quietly, in ways that were easy to explain away until they weren't. My name is Mara Langford, and I am 31 years old. I grew up in a house in Cincinnati with two parents who were not rich, but were comfortable, and a sister named Claire who was 4 years older and who understood something about our family that it took me decades to name. She understood that love in our house was not unconditional, it was allocated. Like a budget, and she had figured out early how to get the larger share. Here's what my family looked like from the outside. Dad was a civil engineer, steady, methodical, the kind of man who solved problems with patience. Mom taught elementary school for 22 years and brought that same structured energy home. Nice house, good neighborhood, 2 daughters who both graduated college. A family portrait that photographed it well. Here's what it looked like from the inside. Claire was the personality, the loud one, the social one, the one who filled rooms. She was beautiful in the way that made strangers compliment my mother specifically, as though she deserved credit. She made friends effortlessly, changed them just as effortlessly, and moved through the world with the certainty of someone who has never once doubted whether they belonged somewhere. My parents loved this about her, not because they were shallow people. I want to be careful here. But because Claire's energy was the opposite of their anxieties. She was proof that they had done something right. I was different. I was the one who read through dinner. I was the one who asked why in situations where my parents wanted me to ask nothing. I was the one who noticed things and then made the mistake of saying them out loud, which in my family was not considered insight but inconvenience. Not difficult exactly, just unnecessary. The daughter who was already fine and therefore needed less. Here's the thing about being the daughter who needs less. You start to believe it. You start to organize your entire life around the assumption that your job is to take up minimum space, to require minimum maintenance, to generate minimum worry. And eventually, low maintenance becomes invisible. And invisible becomes its own kind of damage that is very hard to name when someone asks if you are okay. Because you are okay, technically, and also you are not okay at all. But those two things can coexist for a very long time before you are willing to look at both of them at once. There is a specific memory I come back to. I was 11. Claire was 15. My parents were taking us school shopping, and I want you to understand that this is the kind of small story that sounds like nothing and explains everything. Claire needed a new backpack. She picked one out, a name brand. $40-something, the kind that every social girl in her grade was carrying that year. Mom put it in the cart without blinking. Then I picked out a backpack. Plain, smaller, on sale. Mom looked at the price tag and said, "Good choice. Very responsible." She said it like a compliment. I believed it was a compliment for years. It was not a compliment. It was a signal. It was a small, quiet message about what kind of daughter I was expected to be. Delivered in a school supply aisle, absorbed completely, filed away without examination. And that same message arrived in 100 different forms, over 100 different moments, across 18 years in that house. And by the time I left for college, I had internalized it so thoroughly that I did not even notice I was carrying it. The money. Let me tell you about the money, or rather about what I knew of it growing up, which was almost nothing. Because money in my house was a topic my parents considered private in the specific way that people consider things private when discussing them openly would require them to explain something they'd rather not explain. My grandmother, my father's mother, was a woman named Evelyn Langford. She died when I was 9, too young for me to have known her fully, but not too young to remember her. She was small and dry-humored, and she called me by my full name, Mara Louise, which everyone else shortened without asking. She kept hard candies in her coat pocket, always the same kind, butterscotch, and she offered them like they were significant. She always asked what I was reading, not what grade I was in or what I wanted to be when I grew up. What I was reading right now, this week, this month. When she visited, she sat with me at the kitchen table while Claire ran around the backyard being seen, and she asked me real questions. The kind of questions adults rarely ask children, the kind that assume you have an answer worth hearing. I loved her completely. I want you to know that before I tell you the rest. Because the rest involves money, and when a story involves money, it is easy to lose the person underneath it. Evelyn Langford was not a number. She was a woman who saw me clearly when almost no one else did, and what she left behind was an attempt to protect me after she was gone. She did not know the person she chose to carry out that protection would be the wrong choice. Evelyn Langford died and left behind an estate, a house that sold, some investments she had accumulated over 60 years of deliberate, patient, unglamorous saving. She was not wealthy in the dramatic sense, but she had been steady, and steady over 60 years becomes something real. She was the kind of woman who wrote checks for the same amount to 2 grandchildren because equal meant equal, and she did not believe in hierarchies among the people she loved. My parents told me once, when I was in high school, that Grandma Evelyn had left money in trust for both Claire and me. They said it was set aside, safe. They said it would be there when we were older, when we needed it, when we were ready. They did not say how much. They did not say who managed it or what the terms were or when exactly we could expect to see any of it. They delivered this information the way people deliver information they want you to receive, without examining, briefly, finally, in a tone that suggested the subject was now closed. And I accepted that. Because I was the daughter who accepted things. So I filed it, tagged it future, went back to the book I was reading, and did not look at it again for 13 years. Meanwhile, Claire's life ran on a track that, when I examine it now, I can see clearly was subsidized in ways I could not have articulated then. Her college apartment was nicer than mine, not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, just slightly newer, slightly better located, slightly more comfortable, the way all of Claire's things were slightly more, consistently, always with a reason attached that made any comparison seem petty. Her car when she graduated was newer. When she went through her first breakup at 24 and decided to leave Cincinnati and spend 3 months in Portland to figure things out, my parents supported her, not just emotionally, financially. When she came back and decided to start a small business selling handmade jewelry on Etsy, my parents supported her. When the jewelry business didn't find its audience and she pivoted to interior design consulting, my parents supported her again. When she got engaged at 26 to a man named Derek who had a good smile and very limited financial ambition, my parents helped them with a down payment on a house. See, written out like that, it sounds like a lot. But you have to understand the experience of watching it happen across years, one individual decision at a time. Each thing had a reason. Claire needed help right now. The timing was difficult for her. This was a one-time thing, a bridge, a temporary support. My parents were not sitting me down and saying we are choosing Claire over you. They were just choosing Claire. Quietly, routinely. One reasonable-sounding explanation at a time. And I was paying my own loans, furnishing my own apartment, building my own stability from scratch on my own salary. And I had so completely accepted the role of the self-sufficient one that I had stopped noticing the disparity. I thought I was independent because independence was my identity. But there is a specific and crucial difference between independence you chose and independence that was chosen for you, handed to you while the other option was quietly given to someone else. I had not yet learned to see that difference. I want to pause here, because if you are watching this and you have a sibling who always got more, always got the benefit of the doubt, always had things explained away in ways that made your own accounting of the situation feel like you were the problem, I need you to hear this. The pattern you noticed was real. Your count was accurate. You were not being too sensitive. You were not being difficult. The thing you kept being told you were imagining was happening, and it had a ledger, and the ledger had your name on it. Drop something in the comments if this is landing. Because what comes next is where the story leaves the emotional and enters the documented. And I need you to be here for it. If you haven't subscribed yet, This is the moment. This is a three-part series, and part 1 is only the first layer of what that file contains. Back to the story. I graduated from the University of Cincinnati with a degree in accounting. Not because accounting was a passion, but because I was practical and I was good with numbers, and I had figured out that the most reliable way to be okay in the world was to understand how money worked. My parents were pleased in the mild way they were pleased by things I accomplished, which is to say they said congratulations and moved on relatively quickly. I worked for 4 years at a mid-size accounting firm in Cincinnati. I was good at my job, not flashy good, not the kind of good that gets you written up in company newsletters, but the kind of good that means the partners put the complicated files on your desk because they know you'll catch what someone else missed. I was 28 when I met James. He was an attorney, estate law specifically, which matters to this story in a way I could not have predicted when I sat across from him at a dinner party in March and thought mostly that he was very calm for someone in a room full of loud people. We dated for a year. Got serious. Started building something real together. One evening in his home office, very casually, the way important things often happen, while we were both working on opposite sides of the room, he said the name Evelyn Langford without looking up from his screen. I looked up immediately. He said it again. He'd been doing some background research on a related case. He said there was a trust in that name filed in Hamilton County that he had come across. He said the beneficiaries listed were a Claire Langford and a Mara Langford. I said yes. That was me and my sister. Our grandmother had left us money. It was set aside somewhere. I had always assumed it was just sitting in an account accumulating interest until whenever. Until I was 30, maybe. Until I needed it. He set his pen down. The careful way. He looked at me across the room. He asked when I had last spoken to anyone about it. I said never, really. My parents mentioned it once when I was 16, and I had not followed up. He was quiet long enough that I knew the quiet meant something. He said he wanted to look into something and he would tell me what he found. He said it in the tone he uses when he is protecting me from a partial picture, not hiding. Protecting. There is a difference, and I have learned to recognize it. He told me 3 days later, and even hearing it from James, even sitting in the kitchen of our apartment with coffee in both our hands and his voice as steady as he could make it, I did not fully believe it. Not in my body. Not in the place where belief actually lives. I believed it in the intellectual sense, the way you believe in the existence of things you have not yet touched. He told me 3 days later, and even hearing it from James, even sitting in the kitchen of our apartment with coffee in both our hands and his voice as steady as he could make it, I did not fully believe it, not in my body, not in the place where belief actually lives. I believed it in the intellectual sense, the way you believe in the existence of things you have not yet touched. The touching came in the lawyer's office, with the file. With the numbers on paper that I could put my finger on and verify were real. That is when I believed it. Let me tell you what James found first, so you understand what I was walking into. The trust Evelyn Langford established before her death in 1995 was held with a small estate law firm in Cincinnati. It had 2 equal beneficiaries, 2 equal shares. The trust had terms that allowed partial distributions for documented major life expenses, education, first home, medical emergency, with full distribution at age 30 for each beneficiary. The total value at the time of Evelyn's death after the house sold and the investments liquidated was approximately $860,000, $430,000 each. I sat with that number for a long time. $430,000. I was 28 years old. I had never had more than $12,000 in savings at any one time. I had student loans. I drove a 7-year-old Honda. I had structured my entire life around the assumption that I was on my own and that being on my own was fine, was good actually, was the version of me that worked. And there had been $430,000 with my name on it. I did not say anything to my parents. Not yet. I am going to tell you why. Because it is important to understand the specific kind of caution that comes over you when you have spent your whole life being told your perceptions are slightly off, when you've been the daughter who overthinks, who reads into things, who makes something from nothing. I needed to see the file before I said a word to anyone in my family. I needed the file in my hands and the numbers on paper and a professional confirmation that what James thought he was seeing was actually what he was seeing, so I called the estate law firm. I said my name was Mara Langford, and I was a beneficiary of the Evelyn Langford Trust, and I had some questions about the account. The woman on the phone was quiet for a moment. Then she said she would need to transfer me to one of the partners. The partner came on the line. His name was Mr. Gerald Avis. His voice was careful in the specific way of people who have learned to be careful because their work puts them in the middle of things they did not create and cannot easily fix. He said hello. He said he was glad I had called. He said he had been expecting, at some point, to hear from me. That sentence. I have thought about it many times since. He had been expecting to hear from me. Not hoping. Expecting. As though my call was inevitable. As though the only question had been when. He said he thought it would be best if I came in. He said there were things in my file that he thought I should see in person. I asked if he could give me any indication of what we were talking about. He paused. Then he said, very carefully, that there had been activity on the trust account, and that some of that activity had raised questions that he believed I had a right to understand. Activity. I want you to hold that word, because it is the most careful way a lawyer can say what he needed to say, without saying it on the phone to someone whose full situation he did not yet understand. I went in 4 days later. James came with me. I wore the blazer I wear when I need to feel like someone who can handle things, which is a specific piece of clothing, and I think some of you know exactly what I mean by that. We sat in the parking lot for 3 minutes before going in, and James said, "Whatever is in there, you are going to be okay." I said, "I know." Neither of us entirely believed it. Mr. Avis was in his early 60s. Silver-haired, measured, the particular energy of a man who had been in estate law for 3 decades and had watched money do what money does to families. Which is to say, he had seen everything and was no longer shocked by any version of it, but had not become callous. There is a specific kind of professional warmth that comes from bearing witness to human failure without deciding that the people caught inside it deserve less care. He had that warmth. I noticed it before I noticed anything else about him. He shook my hand. He shook James's hand. He sat down across from us and put the file on the desk, and then he did something I had not expected. Before he opened it, he asked me questions. He asked when I had first been made aware of the trust. Once, I said. High school. Vaguely. He asked if I had ever been provided documentation. No. Ever contacted about distributions? No. Ever asked to sign anything in connection with the trust account? No. Ever informed of who the trustee was or what that role involved? No. He nodded after every answer. Not the nod of surprise. The nod of confirmation. Each no was landing exactly where he expected it to land. Then he said it. The trustee of the Evelyn Langford Trust was my father, Douglas Langford. I heard that. Father. Trustee. 2 words I had never seen next to each other before, and something in my chest went very quiet in the specific way that things go quiet right before they reorganize completely. So I understood now what a trustee was. The person who manages the money. Who holds it? Who distributes it according to the terms set by the person who created the trust? Who keeps records? Who is legally, formally, unambiguously responsible for protecting the interests of the people whose money it is? My father had been holding $430,000 that belonged to me. My father, who never mentioned the trust again after I was 16, who said nothing when I took out student loans to pay for the education my grandmother's money was supposed to cover. Who said nothing when I drove that 7-year-old Honda, who watched me build my life from scratch with my own salary and said nothing, offered nothing, because he was the kind of parent who believed in self-sufficiency, who was proud of how capable I had become, who called me the responsible one as though it were a character trait I had developed independently and not a role I had been assigned. Mr. Avis opened the file. He turned it toward me slowly. He said he was going to walk me through the transaction history. He said he wanted me to have the complete picture before we talked about anything else. He said it the way doctors say things when the image on the screen shows something they need you to understand fully before they name it. The transaction history started in 2009. I was 14. Claire was 18, starting college. There was a distribution, documented as educational expense, that fell within the trust terms. I did not look at the amount immediately. I kept reading. Another distribution in 2010. Another in 2011. These ones were from Claire's share, which was permitted, though the amounts were large and the documentation attached was thin. I kept reading. Then 2013. I was 18, starting college myself. There was a distribution from my share of the trust. Listed as educational expense. Wait, I did not know about this distribution. I paid for college with a combination of scholarships, a part-time job at a campus bookstore, and student loans I was still paying off at 28. If a distribution had been made from my trust for my education, I had never seen that money. I looked at James. He was already looking at me. I turned back to the file. The distributions from my share of the trust over 14 years were consistent, regular, documented with a category, always a legitimate-sounding one. Educational support, home establishment assistance, living expense support during period of vocational transition. I want you to read those last 4 words again. Living expense support during period of vocational transition. That was the documentation attached to a $15,000 distribution from my trust in 2019, the year Claire left her job at a marketing firm to, as she described it, figure out what she actually wanted to do. The year my sister decided to take time to find herself. Money was taken from the account with my name on it to pay for it. And here is the number that was left. My share of the Evelyn Langford Trust, which had started at $430,000, had a current balance at the time I walked into that office of $11,240. 11,000. From 430. Mr. Avis let the silence sit. He did not rush it. He understood that silence was what the moment required. And then very quietly he said, I want to tell you that this firm did not manage these distributions. We held the original trust documents. The trustee managed distributions independently. We became aware of questions regarding the account when we were contacted by an outside party earlier this year. I asked what outside party. He said he was not able to tell me that today, but that the information would become clear as the process moved forward. The process. I asked what process. He said there were legal options available to me. He said that what the transaction history showed was a pattern of distributions that did not align with the trust documentation, meaning the stated purposes did not match the actual use of funds in several instances. He said that as a beneficiary I had rights. He said that as an attorney, and he chose his words very carefully here, he had a professional and ethical obligation to tell me that what I was looking at appeared to constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. That is the legal term for what happens when a trustee uses the power of their position to serve themselves or someone else instead of the person they were appointed to protect. My father was supposed to protect me. That was his legal obligation. That was, I had believed my entire life, his moral one. I did not cry in that office. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect crying and there was no crying. There was something else. A kind of stillness that comes when your body is processing information that your mind cannot fully accept yet, like the moment after a car accident when you are sitting in the wreckage checking yourself for injuries before you feel them. You know something has happened. You do not yet know the full shape of what it is. I had been in an accident. I just didn't know where all the injuries were yet. James drove home. I held the folder in my lap the entire drive. 41 minutes. I looked at it most of the way. Not reading, just looking at the tab. My name, Mara Langford, the quiet daughter, the one who needed less, the one who was already fine. There had been $430,000 that said otherwise. Here is what I knew in that car. I knew the money was gone. Not all of it. $11,240 remained, which is not nothing and is also nothing compared to what had been there. $419,000 moved out of my account across 14 years, one documented transaction at a time. I knew my father had been the person managing that account. I knew my sister's life, across those same 14 years, had never once lacked for a financial bridge when she needed one. The Portland months, the jewelry startup, the down payment, the interior design pivot. Each one covered, each one explained away as family support. Each one funded, I now understood, by a source that had a paper trail, and that paper trail had my name all over it. But here is what I did not know yet on that drive home. I did not know if my mother had known. This mattered enormously, and I could not answer it yet. I did not know if Claire had known, which mattered in a different and almost more unbearable way. I did not know who the outside party was who had contacted the firm before I called, the contact that had prompted Mr. Avis to say he had been expecting to hear from me. And I did not know what I was going to say when I picked up the phone and called my father, because I was going to call him. There was no world in which I did not call him. But I needed to know what I was going to say first. And then there was the thing Mr. Avis had mentioned as we were standing up to leave. Almost as an aside, he said there was additional documentation he was still reviewing and that he would be in touch when he had a clearer picture of it. Additional documentation. I asked what that meant. He said very carefully that the file I had seen today covered the historical transaction record. He said there were some more recent items he wanted to fully understand before presenting them. More recent. I want you to sit with those two words the same way I sat with them in the car on the way home. More recent means not just what happened in the past. More recent means something is happening now. More recent means the story in that file has not finished being written. That is part 2. Because part 1 ends here, with me in a car holding a folder, knowing enough to be certain something was taken from me, and not yet knowing enough to understand the full size of it. Not yet knowing who else was involved. Not yet knowing what the second file contains. Not yet knowing that the person who contacted that law firm before I did was someone I would never have expected. If you are watching this and something in your own family's financial history has never quite added up, if there were assets mentioned once and then never mentioned again, if the explanations were always slightly vague, always slightly incomplete, always offered in a tone that discouraged follow-up questions. I am not saying what happened to me happened to you, but I am saying you have the right to the file with your name on the tab. You have the right to call the firm. You have the right to ask for the transaction history and read every line of it. The quiet daughter had that right. She just needed 29 years, a lawyer she loved, and a name said out loud in a home office on an ordinary evening to finally use it. Part 2 is coming. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss it. Because in part 2, we find out who made that call to the firm before me. We find out what was in the second file, and we find out what my father said when I finally picked up the phone. That conversation changed everything. Not because of what he admitted, because of what he didn't. And that silence told me more than any document in any file ever could. I will see you in part 2.